2 weeks ago. My father stood in court and called me just a delivery girl. Then he held up a photo of me wearing my Red Courier Jacket like it proved something. The courtroom laughed. Even his attorney smiled. What none of them knew was that for the last 4 years I'd been transporting classified diplomatic evidence between federal agencies most people aren't even cleared to name. And honestly, I almost corrected him right there. But sometimes, the fastest way to expose arrogant people is to let them underestimate you first. My name is Rebecca Bennett. I'm 31 years old. And the Red Courier scanner my family mocked for years? It was carrying secrets powerful enough to stop the entire courtroom cold. If you're watching this at night, comment what time you started this story from, and subscribe if stories like this hit differently for you. I read every comment. My father loved introducing my siblings publicly. My brother was always the future CEO. My sister, the successful one. But me? I was never introduced with pride, never described as hardworking, never called dependable, never called intelligent. To my father, I was simply the daughter who delivers packages. And after hearing that sentence enough times, I started noticing something painful. Relatives stopped asking me questions completely. Nobody asked if I was happy. Nobody asked if I liked my work. Nobody asked where my life was going. Because once people decide your place in the family, they stop looking any deeper than the label. I wore the same Red Courier jacket almost every day. Reflective stripes across the chest. Rain stains near the sleeves. Company patch fading slowly from years of use. Some mornings, I started routes before sunrise. Some nights, I finished deliveries after midnight. Apartment stairs, loading docks, security checkpoints, emergency reroutes. But to my father, that jacket represented failure. One night before an important company dinner, he actually looked at me and quietly said, "Can you change before the guests arrive?" That sentence embarrassed me more than I admitted at the time, because deep down, I realized he wasn't ashamed of my job. He was ashamed of being seen beside me. Family dinners always followed the same pattern. My brother talked about investments, my sister discussed promotions and corporate conferences, and my father listened proudly to every word. But whenever somebody asked me about work, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Before I could even answer, my father interrupted. "Rebecca's still figuring life out." Everybody smiled politely after that, then moved on. And honestly, after a while, I stopped correcting him. Because trying to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you becomes exhausting. My phone rang at strange hours constantly. 1:18 a.m., 3:42 a.m., sometimes right in the middle of dinner. And every single time, I left immediately. No explanations, no complaints, just grabbed my scanner and keys and walked out. My family assumed I was desperate for overtime money. My brother once joked, "Imagine ruining dinner for package deliveries." Everybody laughed. But the truth? Some of those deliveries involved diplomatic evidence that couldn't legally stay in one location longer than 30 minutes. And honestly, while they mocked my schedule, entire federal investigations depended on it. My courier scanner never left my side, locked with a 6-digit encryption code, always charging beside my bed, always clipped near my jacket pocket. My sister once picked it up jokingly and asked, "What's inside this thing? Nuclear secrets?" I took it back too quickly, too protectively, and for a second, she actually looked confused by my reaction, but then she laughed it off like everybody else did. Because nobody in my family could imagine something important being trusted to me. And honestly, that assumption protected me more than they realized. If you've ever stayed quiet while people underestimated you, comment what time it is for you right now, and don't forget to subscribe. I'm reading every single comment. Sometimes, black SUVs waited outside my apartment late at night. Engines running quietly, windows fully tinted. They never stayed long. Just long enough for me to step outside carrying secured delivery cases before disappearing again. My neighbors started noticing first. Then eventually, my mother did too. One evening, she quietly asked, "Rebecca, who are those people?" I looked at her for a second, then answered carefully, "Security contractors." Technically, that wasn't a lie. But honestly, it wasn't the full truth either. One afternoon, my father saw me arrive at a restaurant on my courier scooter, and right in front of his business associates. He laughed loudly and said, "Rebecca delivers faster than she makes career decisions." The entire table laughed politely. Meanwhile, inside my delivery bag was classified evidence connected to an international corruption investigation involving 3 countries. And honestly, none of those men laughing at me were important enough to even know the case existed. One night during dinner, my sister noticed bruising near my wrist. Dark marks shaped like fingerprints. She looked genuinely concerned for once. "What happened?" I answered too quickly. "Warehouse accident." But later that night, while staring at those bruises in my bathroom mirror, I realized something painful. My family noticed physical injuries immediately, but emotional ones? Those they ignored for years. A few weeks later, my father accidentally signed for one of my deliveries. The second he touched the scanner, the screen flashed bright red. Restricted chain of custody. He froze immediately. I grabbed the scanner back too fast, too protective, and for the first time in years, my father stopped joking, because suddenly, my job looked unfamiliar to him, more controlled, more serious, more dangerous. And honestly, I think that moment scared him a little. Then everything changed. A legal notice arrived at my apartment. My father filed to remove me from the family trust completely, claiming unstable lifestyle, irresponsible employment, lack of professional credibility. I sat alone reading those papers for almost an hour, not angry, not shocked, just tired. Because after years of carrying responsibilities, nobody understood. My own father still believed the uniform was the entire story. And honestly, I almost skipped the hearing completely. But deep down, something told me this wasn't ending quietly anymore. The courtroom felt colder than I expected. Dark wood walls, rows of quiet people. My father already seated beside his attorney, and the second I walked in wearing my Red Courier Jacket, I saw the disappointment on his face immediately. Like even here, I had embarrassed him again. Then my cousin noticed my scanner clipped to my belt and whispered loudly, "She actually brought the work toy." A few people laughed quietly, and honestly, I let them. My father's attorney stood confidently and started presenting evidence against me. Apartment lease, parking violations, courier schedules, income reports. Then suddenly, he projected a photo of me wearing my delivery uniform onto the courtroom screen. Pause. The exact same picture my cousin posted online years earlier. And my father just sat there watching silently while strangers looked at me like I was irresponsible. Not once did he defend me. Not once. Then the attorney smiled slightly and said, "Ms. Bennett appears highly committed to package delivery." Some people in the courtroom laughed quietly. Even my father smirked. And honestly, that moment should have humiliated me. But instead, I started realizing something important. None of them actually understood what they were mocking, and that made them dangerous. While everybody else kept talking, the judge kept watching me carefully. Not my father, not the attorney, me. And after almost 20 minutes, he suddenly asked, "Ms. Bennett, why does your employment file contain federal access restrictions?" The entire courtroom went silent for a second. My father looked confused immediately, because until that moment, he thought my job was simple. The attorney quickly tried recovering control, then held up one of my delivery route documents and laughed lightly. "These appear to be package transfer schedules." The second I saw the document, my stomach tightened. because he wasn't supposed to have that file publicly displayed. And honestly, he had no idea what he was touching. If somebody ever embarrassed you publicly before knowing the full truth, comment what time it is where you're watching from right now, and subscribe. I'm seriously reading every comment. A few minutes later, the courtroom doors opened quietly, and a man in a dark suit walked inside carrying a sealed folder. No expression, no hesitation. Pause. He sat near the back beside court security without saying a word. But the second I saw him, I knew the hearing had changed completely. My father still thought he was winning. He kept shaking his head dramatically every time my job came up, like my work history proved I was irresponsible somehow. Then finally, he looked directly at the judge and said, "Your Honor, my daughter delivers packages. That's her career." And honestly, that sentence hurt more than I expected. Because even after all those years, that was still all he saw when he looked at me. Then the judge suddenly asked something nobody expected. "Ms. Bennett, what level of clearance do you currently hold?" The courtroom froze instantly. My father looked irritated. The attorney looked confused. And honestly, for a second, I considered refusing to answer publicly, but before I could speak, the federal observer stood up. The man in the dark suit handed the judge a sealed document quietly. The judge opened it slowly, started reading. Then his entire posture changed. Not dramatic, not shocked, cautious. And suddenly, the courtroom stopped feeling casual. People stopped smirking, stopped whispering, stopped laughing. Because for the first time, everybody realized this situation might be much bigger than family court. The judge looked directly at my father for a long time before speaking again, then calmly asked, "Mr. Bennett, are you aware your daughter operates under federal diplomatic clearance protections?" My father blinked slowly, completely confused. And honestly, that was the first moment in my life I watched him realize he might have misunderstood me completely. The judge kept reading the sealed document silently, page after page, and with every second, the courtroom atmosphere changed more. Nobody was laughing anymore. Nobody even moved. Then finally, the judge looked up directly at me and asked, "Ms. Bennett, how long have you held federal transport clearance?" And honestly, the way he asked it scared my father more than the answer itself. I answered carefully, 4 years. My father immediately shook his head like this was ridiculous. Then his attorney laughed nervously and said, "Your Honor, she's a courier." That's when the federal observer finally spoke for the first time. Calm, cold, professional. She transports classified diplomatic evidence between secured federal agencies. And honestly, the silence after that felt heavier than shouting. The court reporter actually stopped typing for a second. My cousin slowly lowered his phone, and my father, the man who spent years calling me the delivery girl, suddenly looked like he didn't recognize me anymore. Not because I changed, because for the first time, he realized he never actually knew me. Then the judge held up one of the documents my father's attorney submitted earlier, the same root file they mocked publicly, and quietly asked, "Who authorized public display of this restricted transfer code?" The attorney's face changed instantly, because suddenly, what looked like harmless paperwork became a federal problem. That's when the federal observer revealed something even worse. Weeks earlier, my father accidentally signed one of my restricted deliveries himself, meaning his signature was now attached to protected chain of custody records. My father looked completely blindsided. And honestly, I almost felt bad for him. Almost. My father's attorney suddenly changed completely. The confidence disappeared. The jokes stopped. Now he kept rereading documents nervously while whispering to his assistant. Because the courtroom wasn't laughing at me anymore. Now everybody was trying to figure out how serious this actually was. The judge leaned back slowly and folded his hands, then looked directly at my father and said, "Mr. Bennett, Your daughter's clearance level exceeds access authorization held by anyone else currently inside this courtroom. And honestly, I'll never forget my father's face after hearing that sentence, because for the first time in my entire life, he looked small beside me. My brother finally stopped avoiding eye contact. My mother looked like she might cry. Even my sister, who mocked my courier jacket for years, suddenly looked confused by her own assumptions. And honestly, that moment hurt more than it satisfied me, because deep down, I realized how little my family ever tried to understand me. Then the Federal Observer revealed something nobody expected. One of the international investigations connected to my transport routes involved corruption tied indirectly to my father's corporate partners. The room froze instantly. My father turned pale. The attorney stopped talking completely. And suddenly, this wasn't just family humiliation anymore. It was becoming dangerous. The judge stared at the sealed documents for a long time, then quietly ordered half the courtroom recordings sealed immediately. No cameras, no public copies, no external discussion. Pause. And honestly, that was the exact moment everybody finally understood something terrifying. The daughter they spent years mocking as just a delivery girl had been trusted with secrets powerful enough to change the entire courtroom. After the judge sealed part of the hearing, court officers quietly started clearing people from the room. The laughing stopped completely. Phones disappeared. Whispers disappeared. Even my cousin, the same one recording everything earlier, suddenly looked terrified to even hold his phone. And honestly, watching the room change that fast felt unreal, because just 30 minutes earlier, these people were laughing at my courier jacket. The federal liaison finally walked toward me directly, calm, professional, completely unreadable. Then quietly handed me a sealed black folder. Not the judge, not the attorneys. Me. My father watched the entire thing silently, and honestly, I think that was the moment he realized something painful. Strangers respected me more than my own family ever had. My father's attorney suddenly stood up looking panicked, then quickly tried retracting several documents they submitted earlier. Because buried inside those filings were restricted route references tied to federal transport chains. And honestly, the confidence disappeared from his face completely. Now he wasn't treating me like the delivery girl. Now he was treating me like legal risk. For almost the entire hearing, my father kept referring to me indirectly. My daughter. The courier. The girl. But after the judge read my clearance file, everything changed. For the first time that day, he looked directly at me and quietly said, "Rebecca." And honestly, that hurt more than the insults, because suddenly, he sounded like he finally realized I was a real person. The judge adjusted his glasses slowly and looked toward me again, then said something nobody expected. "Ms. Bennett, the court apologizes for the public mishandling of your professional records." The room went silent again, and honestly, I almost laughed, because strangers in a courtroom showed me more respect in 10 seconds than my father had shown me in 10 years. My sister stopped making eye contact completely. My brother suddenly looked nervous instead of arrogant. Even my mother, who usually stayed quiet, looked like she might cry, because for the first time, the family narrative stopped making sense. The failure daughter suddenly became the most trusted person in the room. Then the federal liaison revealed something even worse. Some of the corruption evidence tied to my transport routes connected indirectly to vendors associated with my father's company. Not criminal charges, not accusations, but enough to make his attorney immediately stop talking. And honestly, that was the first moment my father looked genuinely afraid. In the middle of the silence, my Red Courier scanner suddenly beeped loudly. One sharp notification sound. Everybody looked at me instantly. I checked the screen calmly. Encrypted transfer update, priority route reassignment. Normal for me, but inside that courtroom, it sounded like a reminder that my real work still mattered outside their opinions. As the hearing paused, my father suddenly noticed something attached near the inside lining of my jacket. A small silver federal commendation pin, tiny enough nobody paid attention before. He stared at it for several seconds silently, then quietly asked, "How long have you had that?" And honestly, I didn't answer, because the real question was, why had he never looked closely enough to notice before? When the hearing resumed, everything felt different. Nobody smirked anymore. Nobody interrupted me anymore. Nobody laughed at my jacket anymore. And honestly, that shift hurt more than the humiliation itself, because it proved something painful. People didn't suddenly respect me because I changed. They respected me because they finally believed my work mattered. And for the first time in my life, my father sat silently while the entire courtroom looked at me differently. When the hearing finally ended, people left the courtroom quietly. No laughter, no jokes, no whispers about my courier jacket anymore. Outside, rain had started falling lightly across the courthouse steps. Black federal SUVs still waiting near the curb. And for the first time in my life, my father looked nervous standing near me. My father stood there silently for a while before finally asking, "Why didn't you tell us?" Honestly, that question hurt more than everything else combined, because after years of mocking me, years of reducing me to the delivery girl, he suddenly wanted access to the truth. And all I could think was, you never actually wanted to know me before. I looked down at my red courier jacket for a second, then quietly answered, "You already decided what kind of person wears this uniform." My father didn't say anything after that, because deep down, I think he finally understood something painful. He never judged my character. He judged my appearance. My mother suddenly started crying beside the courthouse stairs. Not dramatic crying, quiet crying. The kind people do when realization finally catches up to them. Then softly she whispered, "We thought you were struggling." And honestly, that sentence almost broke me, because for years, nobody in my family ever asked if I was okay. They just assumed I failed. Then the federal liaison revealed something my family never knew. 3 years earlier, my father's company suffered a major cyber attack tied to supply chain corruption, and part of the diplomatic evidence I transported quietly helped stop the breach from spreading internationally, meaning while my father mocked my courier routes publicly, those same routes were secretly protecting his company. If somebody ever judged you without knowing what you were carrying privately, comment your time right now and subscribe. I'm reading every comment. Right before I walked toward the SUV, the judge stepped outside unexpectedly and called my name. "Ms. Bennett." I turned around carefully. Then he shook my hand and quietly said, "Thank you for your service." And honestly, that moment felt strange, because strangers kept respecting me instantly, while my own family needed proof first. Later that night, my mother came to my apartment carrying an old newspaper clipping, folded carefully, worn from years hidden away, and on the front was a small article about federal logistics commendations. My name circled quietly in blue ink. She admitted she found it 2 years ago and kept it hidden from my father. My brother finally asked the question everybody avoided all day. "Why didn't you ever defend yourself?" Honestly, I thought about that for a long time before answering, then quietly said, "Because people who only respect titles usually stop listening before the truth starts." And suddenly, nobody in the room had anything left to say. As I walked toward the black SUV, my red courier scanner beeped softly again. Same sound my family mocked for years. But this time, my father watched that scanner differently. Not like a joke, not like embarrassment, like responsibility. And honestly, that tiny shift meant more to me than an apology ever could. My family spent years laughing at the girl delivering packages. They mocked the jacket, the scanner, the scooter, the long hours. Because nobody ever thinks the quiet person carrying the envelope might also be carrying the truth. And honestly, I don't think my father fully understood what I did even after court ended, but for the first time in my life, he stopped looking down on me, and sometimes, that's the closest thing to justice families ever give you. They spent years laughing at the girl delivering packages, without realizing she was carrying things more important than their entire world.